All right, let's jump right in. Today we're looking at a huge biblical prophecy, but with a twist, an interpretation that suggests maybe, just maybe, we've all been skipping the first chapter.
So that's the big question we're tackling, right? Is this super famous end times prophecy actually missing its beginning? In this explainer, we're going to walk through an alternate take on the whole Magog invasion from Ezekiel 38 and 39, a view really championed by the late researcher Chuck Missler.
Okay, so before we can really get into the alternate view, we've got to cover the basics. The standard, conventional take, what most people believe, is that Ezekiel 38 and 39 are talking about one single massive invasion of Israel that's supposed to happen sometime in the latter years.
And Ezekiel gets really specific about who's in this invading army. You've got Magog, which a lot of folks connect to modern Russia. You've got Persia, that one's easy, it's Iran, and then a handful of other nations from Africa and Central Asia. Together, they form what's often called an outer ring of powers that will come down on Israel.
The text is also crystal clear about why they're invading. And, this isn't some kind of holy war. Nope, it's a heist, plain and simple. The stated goal is purely economic, to take a spoil and to take a prey. They're after stuff, cattle, goods, silver, and gold.
But here is where things start to get a little weird. As straightforward as that all sounds, the conventional view runs into a couple of pretty major problems when you start looking at the fine print of the prophecy.
Okay, first off, just look at how the prophecy describes Israel at the time of the invasion. It says it's a land of unwalled villages, a people dwelling safely and at rest. Now, does that sound anything like the Israel we know today? Not even close. Modern Israel is in a constant state of high alert, famously protected by some of the most advanced security walls and fences on the planet.
And the second puzzle, well, it's arguably even bigger. If this is the big climactic end times war, you have to ask yourself, where are all the usual suspects? The nations we see in the headlines every single day. Where are Israel's closest, most hostile neighbors?
I mean, really think about it. The Palestinians, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, this inner ring of nations that literally share a border with Israel, they're just nowhere to be found on Ezekiel's list of invaders. They're just gone. Saudi Arabia gets a mention, but only as a spectator on the sidelines, basically asking, hey, you guys here to grab some loot? It's a massive, glaring omission that really needs an explanation.
So where do we go from here? How do you solve that puzzle? Well, this is where the alternate theory comes in. It proposes that the key isn't buried somewhere else in Ezekiel. Nope, it's in a totally different book, in a passage that a lot of people just seem to skip right over, Psalm 83.
So what's in Psalm 83? Well, it describes a completely different confederacy. And guess who's in it? All those missing neighbors. And their motivation? It's a complete 180 from Ezekiel. It's not about plunder. It's about total annihilation. The text says, "Come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance." This is about existential hatred, not greed.
And that right there brings us to the absolute core of this whole idea. What if these aren't two competing prophecies talking about the same event? What if they describe two different wars, with one of them literally setting the stage for the other?
I mean, when you put them side by side, the differences are just huge. Ezekiel's invasion involves that outer ring of nations, and it's all about taking spoil. The Psalm 83 war involves the inner ring of direct neighbors, and their goal is to wipe Israel off the map. They are completely different conflicts in both their cast of characters and their motivation.
So, this whole theory hinges on a specific sequence. It argues that the Psalm 83 war has to happen first. And you might be asking, why? Well, because its outcome is what creates the very conditions of peace and prosperity that Ezekiel describes as the prerequisite for his invasion.
So let's lay this out. Let's see how this alternate view pieces together a totally new sequential timeline for these prophetic events.
Here's how it could go down step by step. First, the inner ring nations from Psalm 83 unites to destroy Israel. Second, they attack. Third, Israel doesn't just survive, it wins a huge decisive victory. Now, this next step is absolutely key. Fourth, as a result of that victory, Israel expands its territory and finally achieves that prophesied state of dwelling safely and without walls. And it's only then, as a fifth and final step, that this newly prosperous and seemingly unprotected Israel becomes an irresistible target for the outer ring nations who are after its wealth.
This idea also ties in beautifully with the chapter just before the Magog prophecy, Ezekiel 37, which describes Israel becoming an exceedingly great army. Proponents argue this isn't just a poetic description of the nation's rebirth. It's a literal military status, a superpower status, achieved by winning that Psalm 83 war.
So if you take one thing away from all this, let it be this. The Psalm 83 war isn't just another conflict. In this view, it's the missing prelude. It's the cause that leads to the effect of the Magog invasion. And suddenly those two big puzzles, Israel's peaceful condition and the absence of its neighbors, they just click into place. It all makes sense.
And that leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought to chew on. If this interpretation is correct, then the prophetic event to watch for isn't an imminent Russian-led invasion from the north. No. Instead, the very first sign would be the formation of a confederacy among Israel's immediate bordering neighbors, united by a common goal to wipe it from the map.